joined by Charlie Unwin. Welcome, Charlie. Great to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Gillian.
I am so pleased to announce that Charlie will be joining us for the Horses Inside Out conference, the 18th and 19th of February, upwards and onwards. And we're really pleased that he's going to be presenting for us again, because actually, it was a few years ago that you presented last time for the Horses Inside Out.
I don't know how many years ago. It feels like a long time. A lot's
I think it
happened since
was.
then.
A lot has happened. We've had a pandemic. We've had all sorts.
Yeah.
Books published in your case. So
Yeah.
before we get into that, though, I thought it'd be really nice for everyone just to learn a little bit more about you. So perhaps you could tell us a bit about your journey to becoming a sports psychologist.
Yeah, of course. To be honest, I never imagined I would be a sports psychologist, even though I was really interested in the subject from a very early age. I think I was kind of 7 or 8 years old when I read my first book. It was by Steve Backley, the javelin thrower, talking about how his success in sports was really down to his mental attitude towards what he did and how he prepared. And so that I think that got me hooked by the concept of it from an early age. But it's not really a career where there were many job opportunities, and in some ways it still isn't. I think you have to carve out your own opportunities within it. And for me, I was always massively into sport. My dad played rugby for England in the British Lions.
Wow.
I was very much into sport myself, kind of growing up, and ended up being a professional athlete for about 5 years on Team GB in Bath. And that was having studied psychology at university. In between that time, I spent 8 years in the army, and hence the reason I never thought I'd ever be a sports psychologist, because the army, sports, two very different industries. Uh, and actually, what I realized was that no matter who you're working with, when you're under pressure, when you set high aspirations or goals for yourself, psychology plays out in everything that you do. And I realized that more and more of my psychology degree, as it was then, was relevant to the situations that I found myself in, not least in Iraq in 2001 as a platoon commander, at the age of 22. Luckily, I wasn't overwhelmed, but that was thanks to the training that we get in the army, so much of which is psychological. So yeah, I suppose that's what got me interested.
Yeah, I thought that's fascinating. So you've come from such a varied background, but what about horses then? Now you do a lot of work with coaches, you do a lot of work with riders, at all different levels. But what's your background with horses?
I grew up on a farm in the Suffolk countryside, and so we always had horses and many other animals around us. So I suppose they were in the blood in that regard. My mum would always joke at this point to say that I was toing and froing between horses and other distractions for most of my childhood, which I think as a boy is probably quite natural. In that regards, horses were always part and around me, even though I didn't proactively sort of move towards them all the time. I loved competing. I evented. I did a lot of pony club to triathlon, and that was an education in itself. I moving to university, I thought I'd probably get rid of horses and that would be it for me. But I ended up getting into modern pentathlon, a sport that I competed in for many years on the British team. So from a show jumping perspective, I continued with that. And joining the army, I was in the Royal Horse Artillery. So again, not necessarily through choice. I kind of just found myself there. So I think maybe in an unconscious way, I've always gravitated towards horses. And also spent a little bit of time playing polo as well for the army. So it's been really mixed and varied, but they've always been in my life. Hence, when I set up my own business as a sports psychologist, I couldn't not have equestrians in my life.
Absolutely. I think yeah, once they've touched you, horses, you just can't get away from them, can you? It just
Yeah.
pulls you in. So at the conference, your talk title is Creating a Psychologically Informed Environment, Why All Equestrian Professionals Have a Part to Play. Now, obviously at the Horses Inside Out conference, we have a lot of therapists from different modalities, we have coaches, we have riders, we have some vets, dentists, farriers, hoof care professionals. We have a real mix, mostly professionals, but it's opened up to everyone. Everyone is welcome to come. But I really like this idea of why all equestrian professionals have a part to play. Tell
Mm.
us a little bit more about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, do you know when you first mentioned the title for the conference, Onwards and Upwards, it immediately resonated. It actually brought two things to mind. Well, I love the title, by the way, and it brought two things to mind. The first thing was how people move towards their goals and ambitions, whether that's for them professionally as a rider, but we all have goals and ambitions. Very often we're working towards the goals of the riders that ultimately are our clients or we work with or for. Um, but of course we have our own. And if we don't, then we find ourselves meandering quite a lot in our career and what's important to us. So that was the first thing. In terms of onwards and upwards, it implies a sense of where are we moving towards and being really clear in that. So that perhaps is more from a personal effectiveness point of view. The second thing that came to mind for me was more about the opportunities within the equestrian industry as a whole. And what I mean by that is I spent many years working with riders and helping them to achieve their own goals and aspirations. What I soon came to realize is that I couldn't work with everyone as much as I'd love to. Your time is limited. And I realized that coaches, as a cohort, as a group, spend most of the time with riders. And yet, coaches were either reinforcing or perhaps undermining some of the stuff that was so important to the riders psychologically. And so I thought, well, perhaps I should spend more time working with coaches and helping them to understand psychological principles and what they do, such that they can be better at those things. And hence the reason I set up Centre 10, which primarily focus with not just coaches, but equestrian professionals as a whole. We've got professional grooms, we've got vets, we've got physios. And the idea, as I've mentioned in the title of my talk, is around creating a psychologically informed environment. And what I mean by that, the implication of that is that we all have a part to play in helping us all, riders and professionals, achieve our own ambitions and enjoy what we do, love what we do, and be the best version of ourselves. So I really want to explore this topic at the conference and explore how we could be applying these principles for ourselves. And one example of that, to get a bit more specific, is around collaboration. I genuinely believe that there's a great opportunity within equestrian sport to be more collaborative in what we do. I think, the conversations we've had, Gillian, in the past, are a really good example of that, because as a psychologist, I've learned, and it's taken me a while, but I've learned that psychology isn't the be all and end all. And it cannot exist in isolation of other things. That physiology is such an important part of our psychology. What
Absolutely.
our body is doing, and the sort of feelings and the sensations that manifest within ourselves when we're under a bit of pressure, when we're not feeling so confident, when we're questioning ourselves, we those feelings manifest themselves in a way manifest themselves in a way that changes our or shifts our psychology. So we can't just address the psychology without understanding the physiology and the impact that that's having on us in the moment. So I've really enjoyed the last couple of years being much more collaborative in the industry and recognizing how all of these pieces of the jigsaw fit together. And I'm sure many of the people that come to your conference will probably be of the same mindsets.
Yes, absolutely. I think at Horse Insight, one thing we're always talking about is the importance of teamwork. So obviously we're very often focusing on the anatomy, the biomechanics of the horse, but in order for the horse to be musculoskeletally healthy, everything
Yeah.
else has to be right. So every team member, and I think that the sports psychology aspect for the rider and for everyone else involved with that horse is really, really important. Now, it's quite interesting because I think very often when we think about psychology within equestrianism, we think about the rider's
Mm.
psychology. But it's really interesting what you were saying there about the professional, each of us as professionals working within the industry, because I think that as mostly self-employed people, we've got a lot of different things to deal with, being self-employed, from social media to competitors to making sure you're doing the best that you
Mm.
can, and coping with the pressures of that. So I think it'll be really interesting to see if you've got any sort of tips for psychology tips for that at the conference as well, with to helping professionals to be in their best psychological state as well.
I hope so. Yeah, yeah. I hope I'll be able to bring a lot to that. And actually, if I can just pick up on the first point you mentioned there around psychologies are very often related to riders in equestrian sports. Actually, I would say that psychology often gets forgotten because the rider often gets forgotten in the dynamic. It's a bit of I actually think it's a little bit of an elephant in the room sometimes, whereby as coaches, as professionals, we're so drawn to the horse, almost the majesty of the horse, such an incredible animal. And because they provide such an obvious focal point for understanding what's going on. And so very often we end up working with the rider through the horse. If the
Yes.
horse is doing that, what instruction do we have to give to the rider to get the horse doing something differently? What we don't always do is come at it through the lens of the rider purely. And I think that's something I'm really keen to explore and help people to sort of understand a little bit more. And then that plays into what you just said there about helping every equestrian professional create a psychologically informed environment. Very often, I get this with sports therapists in terms of, you might be doing a sports masseur, for example, a sports masseur and giving a sports massage. And very often that time, that 45 minutes, 1 hour spent with an athlete, where they're forced to be quiet and quieten, and their mind quietens, and things occur, things pop up. And very often it's those physios that have the conversations or have the opportunities or the space to work with athletes in a way that even coaches might not have that opportunity. That's something very akin to Olympic sport, where I've spent a lot of time working with physios, for example, rather than the athletes themselves, in order to help the physios do simple things brilliantly when it comes to psychology. So that will be another, I think, theme at the conference is what are the fundamentals, what are the principles, the simple principles that we can do brilliantly, because I think that will account for 90% of the impact that everyone has
Yes.
in this area, rather than necessarily trying to overcomplicate it, which there is a danger that psychology, because it's very often run by academics at university, there's a danger that we don't address the world-class basics when it comes to psychology. So I think that'll be another theme as well.
I really like your doing simple things brilliantly, because I think that applies to everyone. I can see, myself as a therapist and teaching equine therapy to other equine therapy professionals, those techniques just really being doing the simplest of techniques as well as you possibly can, and
Yeah.
thinking about what you're thinking about whilst you're doing them as well. I think that's can be really powerful. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about your new book. But it's not that new anymore, is it? Yeah. So I was really excited when I saw the title, Inside Out.
There
Hello.
you go.
So
I,
we
I must have been subconsciously inspired.
I love it, and you're going to have some copies of your book available at the conference as well. So
I can do, yeah.
yeah, tell us more about your book.
Yeah, so Inside Out, funnily enough, as a title was a title I always had in mind, and apologies, I'd never actually made the connection. I remember sending you an email soon after saying, "Oh, by the way, you might see that my book's come out, and I promise, there's no infringement there or anything like that." But For me, it always seems like a very important and natural title. And the premise of the book is that whoever we are, whatever we're trying to achieve, whatever goals we set for ourselves, and whatever our opportunity and baseline ability in what we do, um, ultimately our performance will manifest itself from the inside out. And what I mean by that is that um, you're starting almost with your physiology. That will determine your psychology and your mentality, which ultimately then determines your behavior, and in particular the consistency of your behavior, and which then determines your performance ultimately, no matter what it is. So the book, it's not equestrian related necessarily, although there are one or two anecdotes in there. But I talk about my experience working with anyone from elite athletes, Olympic champions, to fighter pilots, special forces, to sort of corporate CEOs, and yeah, real mix to DJs, radio DJs, and what I try to do is distill it down to the human elements in our performance. That's true for all those different industries, and more importantly, how we can actually proactively train those things. Because I think there's a danger with a lot of psychology literature that it becomes a running commentary of what we're doing. You're not doing that well because you're not feeling confident. You're not feeling confident. But actually it becomes a commentary rather than something that we proactively train ourselves to get better at. And the element of training is really important in the book. So it focuses on three dimensions: the thinking dimension, what's going on in our head; the feeling dimension, what's going on in our body that's informing what's going on in our head; and the intuitive dimension, which is really important for equestrians because it's what we do without thinking. It's that intuitive ability to do the right thing without realizing why you're doing it. And again, more importantly, how do we train our intuition? How do we
Just
train
gonna
that?
ask that question.
Yeah. Well, you have to read the book,
I
but
will.
but it's a fascinating subject because a lot of people think, oh, I'm just really intuitive. A rider coming into, a skinny fence and the horse ducks to the left and they just correct them without even realizing it. So, a lot of these things with horses, we respond before we even realize we've responded. That's being intuitive. But we can actually train that. But it requires us to be very mindful and aware of how our mind works, such that we can train our subconscious to work for us in the backgrounds. It's really fascinating. It's really interesting. So that's the intuitive dimension.
That sounds absolutely fascinating. I am going on holiday in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm taking your book with me. It's my holiday
Ah,
read, so I'm really looking forward to that. And yeah, because that
I
is
always get nervous when people say that because I realize that when people take a book on holiday with them, they've taken time to select that book, and there are so many other things that they could read. And if they're disappointed, I think, oh no, but fingers crossed, we've had good feedback. So
no,
hopefully
I'm
you won't be
well.
disappointed.
I know you, so I'll be reading it. I'll be hearing your voice as I read the book. I'm
Oh,
really,
poor
yeah, really
you.
looking forward to that. No, and I think this intuition, you're thinking about equine therapy, that's something that we're working with so often. And with horses, we have to have so much intuition. And yeah, so I think that would be really, really interesting. So,
Yeah.
well, Charlie, thank you so much for taking the time out. I know you're a very busy person, so really appreciate this. And we are really, really looking forward to your presentation at our conference next February. So just a reminder, 18th and 19th of February, upwards and onwards. It's at Loughborough University, but it's a hybrid event, so you can join us in person or online. So thank you again, Charlie, for joining me. And
I look
I
forward to
will,
seeing you all there.
yeah, see you in February. Thanks a lot.